this year marks 20 years of the Lotus Nei Gong School, which is quite incredible, really. Time has flown by. That means that I've been teaching as a independent teacher, not assisting in somebody else's class, which I did beforehand, but I've been teaching independently as a teacher for 20 years. That actually quite surprises me when I say it. I mean, in all good conscience, I shouldn't have been teaching for 20 years because I'm 44 now, and I started teaching when I was 24, which is far too young. It's far too young to be teaching. And when I started teaching, it was for a specific reason that I'll get into. But yeah, I shouldn't have been doing it. I technically I was more than capable of teaching what I was teaching, but I think that there's something wrong with somebody of that age teaching or being in the role of a teacher. And when I look back on it to when I first started teaching, I didn't do the most amazing job of it, that's for sure. So I'll get into all of this a little bit and what I feel about this. So this podcast, if you're not interested in what I'm going to talk about, you may as well stop now, because it's going to be a little bit of a reflective thing on 20 years of teaching and running Lotus Nei Gong and the phases I've been through. Perhaps a little self-indulgent, but I'm allowing myself the chance at 20 years of teaching to sit and have a look at it. So yeah, may as well start with how I started teaching. I mean, basically, I've been doing martial arts for a long time, and I'm sure many of you are familiar with who I am, know that I know my backstory a little bit. But if not, I grew up in a family of practitioners of martial arts. My mother, my father, my uncle, basically were all practitioners of martial arts, a mix of Japanese martial arts, Western martial arts, if you like, and Chinese martial arts. So my family influences between the people in my family were karate was a huge part of it, Shotokan particularly, and then there was also Western boxing. My uncle was a Western boxing instructor, and my father had done some of that when younger, and then Tai Chi, which both my father and my uncle got into when I was young, and then my mother doing karate as well. So it was a spread really of these kind of influences of martial arts. There was also some on my uncle's side some kendo as well, so a bit of a mix of things, And so I grew up in this kind of surrounding, this background with people practicing martial arts all the time around me, and I remember the kind of I guess it was a frustration or was it? Yeah, maybe a little bit amongst my family. I think I remember the frustration in my father a little bit of really studying what was a combative arts, but actually being more interested in the sort of spiritual or transformative components of these practices. And certainly I remember both my father and my uncle, I guess, actually kind of going in that direction and wanting to study this side of the arts, and this started a sort of journey to explore how can these arts that are used for self-defense and fighting be taken a step further. And I think this is really what that search that was there. If I think, especially in the case of my father, that search for how to use these arts and to move in a more spiritual direction, which he did in his own way, of course, also kind of stayed with me as the flavor of my teaching too. So this is really what everything has been about. I'm not naturally someone who's interested in the clash between two people, sort of combative stuff. There's a side to my nature that is fascinated by it, I guess, but it's not the mainstay of my interest and never really was. Also, the healing and medicinal side of these arts has never really been a major interest of mine. But actually, the maximizing human potential and what human beings are capable of doing, not just on a physical level, but on a more subtle and psychological level, and also a spiritual level, that was definitely something that grabbed me and was very interesting to me alongside of all of these arts. And I think Lotus Nei Gong, my school that I run, is very much a product of that. It's a product of that kind of mindset, and it's always quite hard for me to pin down. I think when people ask me, for example, if I meet the general public, what do you teach and what do you do for work? It's normally what they ask, isn't it? And sometimes I avoid the question, but because it's always a bit tricky. But when I say I teach Qigong and Chinese Gong Fu, it's always very difficult to help them to understand exactly what I teach or why I teach or what the essence of what I do is, because of course people already have their ideas. Is it a fighting art? And it's like, well, not really to me. Is it a sport? Not really to me. But at the same time, there's a lot of fighting and combative stuff that's taught within the martial art classes. It's like a total enigma, isn't it? That you teach this sort of subject, but it's not. There's an underlying ethos and essence behind that. That's not really why you're doing it. And then to also try to explain the spiritual concept to them is very tricky. And then they don't really understand why you don't just meditate or why you don't just go to church. It's it's a hard one to grasp. And the closest I can come, really, in my opinion, is that the subtle and the energetic and the spiritual, the transformative, is studied through the process of trying to use various tools or using various tools to train human efficiency to a very high level, to the best of your ability, and I think that maximizing the efficiency of your body happens on a physical level with body control, which I think is where martial arts come in massively. With regards to psychology, I think a large part of the potential from it comes from the ability to maintain your center and maintain your core of who you are under huge amounts of pressure, which is really what the martial arts are about to me. And then also, of course, these things all serve as a bridge across to the subtle, the energetic, which for many people they don't believe in, of course, and that's okay. I think that your journey into martial arts should be, or should serve you. Like, I think your journey should be individual, and the art should serve what you're interested in. So if that's not a part of their journey, that's fine. I don't mind that, but it's definitely a part of mine. So this whole kind of concept that I have from a young age of the martial arts being a way to create a higher degree of potential and skill within your life, and maybe to evolve in a direction that is more beneficial to you through the arts of combat, medicine, and subtle spiritual search. Really, that's ultimately what they are to me. So that's why they're very hard to explain. And I think that when I started teaching 20 years ago at the age of 24, I hadn't even got that concept clear in my own head myself. So I didn't really even understand why I was doing what I was doing. So I remember my first classes that opened in Cardiff in the UK, in Wales, were actually there was two subjects. I was teaching initially Qigong right at the start. But I was also teaching Xingyi from the beginning, Xingyi Chuan, which is a martial art quite separate from the Tai Chi that I'm maybe a bit more known for these days in the internal art circles. So right from the beginning, I was teaching these classes that were the Xingyi class was quite violent in many ways. It was definitely taught in as a 24-year-old testosterone full male probably does when they throw themselves into these arts. And this was balanced by the Qigong that still had a fairly martial mindset to it. I remember people coming into the classes expecting the Qigong to be a particular thing, and it was a lot of pushing, a lot of hard work. So that was really the ethos when I began, and I kind of threw myself into it, teaching what I'd been taught, but not really. I think this was a problem teaching from a young age, was I didn't really know the reasons why I was teaching, or the goal, the ethos, the philosophy behind the existence of my school. So in some ways I was a bit of a lost soul, because I was just teaching the art as I'd been taught, but it's hard to explain to me. There was no overarching sort of, like I say, ethos behind the whole thing. And I think actually this happens with a lot of martial arts schools and a lot of martial arts teachers, and it took me quite a lot of years to realize that I had to find my own way within these arts. Originally, I started teaching because I had two friends who wanted to learn Jingyi, particularly, and I said that Jingyi couldn't really be learnt without there being an energetic or an internal component to it. And at this stage, I was a number of years in. I was like 8 or 9, maybe even 10. I don't know, years into. No, maybe 8 or 9 actually. Yeah, something like that. Anyway, into my own study, that many years into my own study of Qigong, and I'd already hit certain levels of skill. certain levels of skill, I think it's fair to say, that enabled me to form one of my earliest opinions was that the internal arts can't really be studied separate from Qigong. So therefore, I opened a Qigong class one night a week for these two people, and then a Jingyi class on the other night of the week for these two people. That's all it was. And what I did was I went to my teacher and I said that these people wanted to learn, but they couldn't get to where my teacher was, and my teacher said, "Go for it, set up a class and do it, run your lessons." So I did, and I started, and it just exploded. I remember the hall we had a big glass window, so it was quite public. People would walk past and see what you were doing, and it was in a hall with lots of. It was a community center that had a number of martial arts going on. I remember there was a karate class in one space. What else was there? Maybe an Aikido club. Or maybe not. There was something. I can't remember. It's 20 years ago. There was karate. There was another Japanese art then. And there was ninjutsu as well, which I was very confused by this class because I thought they did very silly things, this particular club. But they were all in this class together, all in this community center at the same time. So I was teaching in this hall doing Qigong and Jingyi. And at the beginning of Jingyi, it was just people standing opposite in Santi as much as anything. So probably very peculiar to the people around. And of course, pre-internet, the internet existed, but it wasn't. It was empty. The internet was empty. You go on the internet, there was nothing there. Maybe some chat rooms or something that I didn't use. I wasn't really into it, but the internet wasn't really a big thing. So therefore, most people didn't even know what these arts were. Like Jingyi wasn't well known. Qigong was known, I guess, but like these days, people assume that everyone knows. If you're in the martial arts, you know what all the martial styles are, and that's because you get your information from the internet and you can see it on YouTube. But pre-internet, actually, Jingyi was still quite unusual. I mean, I remember learning Jingyi, starting it, and the first teachers I studied with them are definitely not the teachers I ended up staying with. But I'd never heard of Jingyi when I started it. I had no idea. There was just a class going on with somebody I trusted, and I went and I started learning Hebei style Jingyi for these guys, and I didn't know what it was. So yeah, it was funny back in those days how hard it was to get hold of information. So I started teaching this class, and these two guys in this public hall, big glass front. And then what happened is more people started walking past and literally just sticking their head in to ask what's going on, and I would say Qigong, and we're doing Chinese martial arts, and then they would ask if they could join, and I said sure, and I ended up having a bunch of people come from the other martial art classes, which didn't actually go down too well with a couple of classes. It was my earliest taste of political conflict within the martial art world, and then gradually more and more students came, and I remember us getting to within 6 months. Yeah, 6 months easily, something like that. Not very long, I was just finding my feet. I didn't know what I was doing. Started teaching. I was working a lot with my teacher and my family as well to understand how to teach and just kind of fucking it up, basically, but people liked it. And then within a short space of time, within 6 months, there was 30 to 40 people in the room. They knew I did Tai Chi, and actually Tai Chi was my main interest, so that started to get introduced into the mix, and then it just grew. It always expanded. Lotus Nei Gong is a funny thing. I mean, as a school, one of the criticisms that I get, excuse me, I'm being attacked by flies. I'm up in the mountains, and the bugs up here, the mountain air makes them a little bit bigger, I think. Yeah, I mean, you get naysayers and everything, people who don't like what you do. I guess the modern Gen Z word for them is haters, but I don't think they hate. And I don't think they hate me. Hate is a very strong term, isn't it? I mean, I don't think I hate anyone personally, but so it's a weird term for it. But you do get critics, of course, when you do anything, and that's fine. And one of the criticisms is that I'm a marketing genius, which I find really funny, because if I'm a marketing genius, then it must be very easy to be a marketer. It must be very, very simple, because my marketing consists of some books that I wrote that actually, I wrote some books originally for a couple of them for my own students that I was teaching, and somebody sent that book off to a publisher who initially looked at it and was like, and then picked it up and published it. So okay, there's books. I think that's probably the only thing I've ever done that's different from anyone else, because what else do? I have a website. Everybody has a website. I have a YouTube channel, which I talk to like this. I think everybody has a YouTube channel. And I have Instagram that I post on. That's it. That's my marketing, and I've never made any effort. I don't have an email list, never have had. maybe the admin in our school started one recently. I'm not sure, but that's not something we've ever used. I've never Dropboxed anybody with advertisements or emailed them out with courses. When I do put on a course, it's literally on my website and I don't tell anybody. And in fact, other people within the school complain that I never tell them about the courses that are running. You have to actually make an effort to look. So, I mean, that's my marketing. A marketing genius? Sure, fine. Maybe I'm a marketing genius if that's all it takes. And so I've actually found that Lotus Nei Gong didn't expand because of marketing particularly. Lotus Nei Gong just expanded through word of mouth. And this has shocked me because I remember teaching and working with these people, and it just kept growing and growing. And I remember thinking, surely this is what all classes do. And then, of course, I looked around and realized that Lotus Nei Gong was starting to grow exponentially to a level that was beyond my control, actually. Part of the issue was I wasn't very good at saying no, so I could never turn anyone away. So the class just kept expanding. And that class in Cardiff ended up being 4 nights a week, classes packed, had to change to another venue, which was an Aikido hall. And that was after about the first year of teaching. And I remember after that first year, when we changed from our community center to the Aikido hall, that's when the name Lotus Nei Gong came about. So the first year, we didn't even have a name. It was just me teaching some people, and it expanded. And at the time, I was doing a university degree. And I very quickly realized that whether I planned it or not, my life was going to end up being a teacher of these arts. And the funny thing is, like, a lot of people want to be a teacher of the arts. They want to teach Tai Chi, they want to teach Qigong. You even get people emailing the school up you've never met, asking how to become a teacher. And I find that such a weird attitude. I very rarely respond to those people. It's, you should come and learn the art for the sake of learning the art. But so many people want to be teachers. And I never did. Like, I never wanted to be a teacher. I didn't. I guess I wasn't opposed to the idea, but I was indifferent to it. And I think mainly because my parents did it, and my uncle did it, and because my family did it, it held no appeal. Like, nobody in their right mind wants to do what their parents did today, because when you're growing up as a kid, I remember watching all of the stresses and the strains and the difficulties of running a martial arts association and the projection upon my family members from students. And I just remember all the difficulties. And I'm sure that that's the same whatever job someone does. I'm sure if your parents were doctors, you would see how difficult it was to be a doctor. Or if your parents were businessmen, you would see how difficult it is to be a businessman. Everything comes with challenges. So I grew up seeing all the difficulties my parents had running a martial arts association. And so I didn't want to do it. Like, that wasn't an appeal to me. I was interested in the martial arts because I wanted to explore what was possible, but I didn't want it as a job. But about 6 months to a year into running Lotus Nei Gong, I very quickly realized, oh, this is what I'm going to end up doing. It felt, I'm not really a hippie-ish guy, but it felt karmically like there was something deeper taking place here, because I made no effort whatsoever and it kept going. And then I remember getting it all wrong. I think I've spoken about this on another podcast, so sorry if I repeat myself. Getting old, see, I repeat things. I remember standing in the class one day and I looked at the people there, and it was during a Qigong class, and I saw a look in their eye from a number of them, not from all of them. And it's not a criticism of the students, it's a criticism of me. That the look in their eye was a little glassy-eyed and a little cult-like, like a little, they started to see me as something else, or maybe almost something, I was projecting something else that wasn't that healthy. And I realized that this was going down a wrong route, because not only did I not want to be a martial arts teacher particularly, I definitely don't want to be a cult leader. That wasn't my aim. And at the time, these days I'm actually quite religious in a strange way, but back then, 2004, 2005, I was heavily atheistic, and very anti the whole concept of church and religion, something that has changed in me a bit. But I remember seeing this happening and realized that I was turning into something I really didn't want to be. And then students starting asking questions that I wasn't used to, because previously people asked me, how do I align my knee? How do I make this punch better? How do I defend this technique? How do I get my form better? All things I was, happy to deal with. But then students started asking me things like, what should I do about my job? What should I do with a problem in my marriage? What should I do about my finances? Or like deeper life questions. And and always right from then, right from the beginning of all of this, even at age 24, 25, I used to say, I knew right away, I can't answer these questions. I'm not, most of you are older than me. You've had more life experience than me in that realm, and it's not within my remit to teach such things. And I'm only here to teach martial arts. And that ethos is something that has stuck with me, because I still would not answer questions about people's lives, because people's lives are people's lives. If there's something in people's lives I can help them with, and there is, of course, I try to help them out, but I'll never give them advice. It's not on those kind of things. I'm here to teach a particular thing, and I'm not here to get involved in the interpersonal nature of someone's life, because the problem with that is, as a teacher, sometimes your word carries more weight than it should. So if somebody asks me about their marriage, and I don't know anything about their marriage, I mean, my view of relationships is when someone's, you never meet, I've said this to students before, like when you meet someone who's having trouble within their relationship, you always meet the one that isn't the problem. It's always the other one. Do you know what I mean? You always meet a woman who says, oh, my male partner's terrible. You meet a man who says, oh, my female partner's terrible. You never meet anybody who says, I'm terrible. I'm the problem in my relationship. And that pattern means that, A, you're never getting a true story. You're always getting a skewed version of it. And B, I don't know their relationship. I don't know their life or anything. And so if I don't know their life as well as they do, and I'm not an expert in such things, and I'm supposed to be teaching martial arts, then that means I don't have a say in such things. And I point this out, and I don't give that advice. And I think that when I was 24, 25, and these questions started coming through, I started to realize, oh, I didn't know all this came with teaching martial arts, medical questions and things like this as well. So I stopped. So there was actually a false start to Lotus Nei Gong. I actually stopped teaching for a while, and I disappeared. I remember, where did I go? Thailand originally, and then through into China for months and months and months on this particular trip. And I carried on studying, and actually met a couple of new teachers in this period that started to change what I was doing. But it was also a lot of time of self-reflection, quiet time on my own, trying to figure out, what I was doing as a teacher. And I came back and sort of reset the school, rebooted it, I think is the Marvel cinematic term for it. I came back and rebooted the school with a heavy emphasis on, look, this is about the system and this is about the exercise, and it's not about forming a religion, and I'm not here to be a life guide, and I'm not here to be a life coach, and kind of made sure that that was very clearly set from the beginning, and always tried to maintain that as best I can from those early years right up to now. So on that long trip into Asia, originally I planned on going for 3 months, I think it was, and I ended up staying for just under a year, I think, on that particular trip. And it's funny that I remember going out to Asia, and I came from a background with no money at all, nothing. My family were not wealthy people. Running a martial arts association was not making them into multimillionaires. And my dad also worked as a builder, a painter and decorator, a builder. But no, I didn't come from any cash or anything like this. So those days when I was traveling in Asia, same as with the other travels I've done before going to see teachers and things, it was all on such a shoestring. And I remember being so happy I managed to make the money last for 9 months. But I messed it all up in the end, because I went I went around Asia, and I started in Thailand on this particular trip. And I remember going to see some monks that I was very interested in, because I've become quite interested in Theravada at the time. So I was exploring the forest tradition a little bit, and I met one of the teachers who became very influential in my sort of understanding of meditation at that time in Thailand. And then from there I heard about another guy and went into China, and then I started to meet new martial arts teachers. And it was one of those trips. Sometimes on trips in Asia, you just kind of, things fall into place and you meet people, And the people I was meeting weren't sort of particularly mainstream people or anything. So it was an interesting time. And then I messed up, because I went to Japan, because I heard about this contact in Japan. And I remember at the time being on such a tight budget that when I went to Japan, I met this teacher, and within 10 minutes my budget was gone, because I'd underestimated how expensive Tokyo was compared to the rest of Asia. So I was very quickly unceremoniously dumped back into Europe when the funding ran out. And I won't get into it now, but I went through a whole, it's not very interesting, I went into a whole creative process of trying to find funds with grants and things to fuel the trip back to Asia to carry on training. And I remember that time thinking, no, I'll do these 9 months in Asia, and then I'll try to fashion some kind of life. And I think it's because I'd been getting pressure from people back home, that you need to look after your life. What are you doing? There was this whole kind of like working class English people. Maybe it's the same other places, but as a working class English person, I remember the pressure you get from people saying, oh, you'll always end up bankrupt and in trouble if you don't get a job and a mortgage. You need to get on the housing ladder, they would say, and all these kind of things. And so I kind of felt that pressure a little bit. So I came back, and I remember coming back to the West, and I taught some classes, and I was living in Somerset at the time in the UK, and started teaching there. And once again, that class exploded, much bigger than I ever planned it to. It just kind of happened. So I once again found myself going from what I thought would be teaching a few people to in charge of this, what at the time seemed huge, now would seem tiny to me, but these people. And I was reconnected back with the people in Wales. So I was teaching the people in Cardiff, teaching the people in Somerset in the UK, and it was expanding. But I found that there was a discomfort with, it wasn't right. It wasn't right for me to be back in the West. So again, I got the money together and went back into Asia. And really that's where, my time has probably been 2/3 of my time, easily over half, maybe 2/3, I think, of my time since since the school opened has been spent in Asia, exploring different lineages and traditions. So I ended up spending years in China, and then Southeast Asia, tons of time, and I'm still here now. I mean, I'm in Bali. This is the mountains of Bali, and I know there's, again, back to these naysayers thinking that I'm on some kind of holiday or I'm just here for the luxury. And it's actually not the case. If I could choose where I lived, I could live anywhere at all. I would actually live back in the West, because I've not, much as I like it here, I don't know. I think there's a part of me where, for a long time, has wanted to live back in the West, but I'm here because I'm training. That's it. I'm here because I'm studying. So the part of the reason, or the only real reason I'm in Asia, is because it's close to teachers and close to places where I'm studying, where I'm learning. So this is sort of a key ethos for Lotus Nei Gong, the school that's been around for 20 years, is that I'm also continuously studying and training. So I'd already studied, martial arts since age 4 before the school opened, and then I had, and my martial arts changed into something else when I hit my teens and my 20s, of course, because I went from Japanese arts into Chinese arts. But then when the school opened, my training went up, my study went up. So I've been constantly training and learning with new people for the last 20 years while the school has been open. And this means that Lotus Nei Gong has been through various phases, and I can almost identify them. It's almost like the eras of Lotus Nei Gong. And so this is what I think they are. People who've been in the school for years and years may remember them, may remember these eras of what Lotus Nei Gong was. It's like we need our own history book. And the early eras of Lotus Nei Gong was just me not really knowing what I was doing. So I was teaching, well, I knew, well, not with regards to the arts, but like I said, I didn't know my philosophy, I didn't know my ethos. The early years were just repeating what I've been taught, and very martial arts focused in a very standard fashion for martial arts. And then the next era after this, there was a phase where, especially when I was spending lots of time in China, lots of it in Shandong province, quite a lot in Hunan, and moving around a fair bit aside from that, quite a lot of time in Chengdu as well, which is a very beautiful city. If you've not been there, the food nearly kills you, in my experience, because it's very spicy, but a beautiful part of China. So I spent years and years in China, and at this time I was kind of going back into China, then back into the West, and back into China, back in the West, running seminars and courses and finding my feet. And I think very much influenced by the Chinese culture, aside from the martial arts, was I became very traditional and obsessed about lineage, became very, very important to me. So there's a whole lineage phase, which is, I still see a lot of Chinese martial arts going through, Chinese martial artists going through this whole lineage thing, where you become obsessed with, can you be baished into a lineage, and do you have this sort of 26th or 27th generation honorary from a particular line? And even though I'd already studied with Chinese families prior to this. So even when I was younger, I was training with my uncle's teacher, which was Shen Hongzun, and I was training with him, known as Dr. Shen in the West, for a long time, as well as other Chinese teachers that I was meeting and people I was traveling into Europe to see. And So I already had so it wasn't that the lineage phase was about finding traditional teachings. It just wasn't. I already had traditional teachings, but there was this whole credentials thing, and I still see it going on. So I pursued these sort of traditional lineages, and I got them. I was initiated by Wang Haitao into his tradition, and then I ended up, well, long story short, I ended up with Yang style lineages, Tai Chi lineages. I ended up with an official recognition of a Chen variant called Hunyuan lineage. I ended up with a Long Menpai. I ended up with a Chan lineage. Like I ended up getting lineages all over the place. And the funny thing, actually, I got some other lineages that didn't really serve any purpose. I don't think any of them served any purpose. And this is what I'll get to in a minute. But I've got some just because I was white. It was like, I was a DEI. I got it for DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusivity purposes. I got some lineages, which is quite funny now. So I went into some schools, and I remember one in Beijing particularly, and there wasn't a huge amount of Westerners studying out there in Asia. There was a number. You'd still bump into people, of course, but there wasn't tons. So often you would go to a Chinese martial arts teacher, and you would start training with them, and if you were white, and they assumed you had money, and once they found out I had a school, I would often be offered lineages within like 10 minutes. I still advise people, if you care about lineage, if that's what you want, and you want credentials, the easiest way to get lineage is to simply have a school. That's it. And as soon as you get there, that oftentimes there's a certain type of Chinese martial arts teacher that will very quickly want to induct you into their lineage so that they have a kind of ownership and obviously a business front. It's like they've kind of, what do you call it? What's that called? A pyramid scheme. It's like the pyramid scheme. They've franchised you into their lineage. So I have some lineages that I won't even mention because there's one lineage I have, for example, that I went through the Baisha and I got it, and I don't even know their system. I don't. I know one form. Well, I've probably forgotten it now. I knew one form from their system. I don't know the rest of the system. I never stayed to study it because I didn't like it, but I have a lineage in that particular tradition, and if I was more unscrupulous, I'd probably list that on my CV as a lineage. So anyway, there was that phase where I became very, very obsessed with this. And at the time, I was really getting into learning the Chinese language. I even went to college for a little while to study the Chinese language, and measure words fucked me up. So that was a problem. If you've ever studied Chinese language, you'll know the pain of measuring words. So I got really interested in this and became very traditional. And I was very obsessed with finding sort of Taoist lineages because at the time the teachers that inspired me were into Neidan. And at that time you'll see me in sort of traditional Chinese attire as requested by my teachers and things like this. And that phase, I see it as a form of immaturity, actually. Not in others, I don't want to comment on others, but in myself, because that desire, maybe in some others too, but that desire to hunt for lineages and tradition came from that kind of insecurity and that desire to have what I perceived as a major credential. But as with anything, like receiving those lineages, there's an energetic component to it, which if you go on the podcast apps, it's not on YouTube if you're watching this on video, go on the podcast app, you actually find there is an episode that's only recorded with sound. I never got around to doing a video for it that discusses my view on the actual workings of lineage on a subtle and esoteric level, so you can find that. So I won't get into that now, but even on the sort of a practical level, lineage gives you access to maybe the system, and like lineage is very clean. If it's a Long Menpai system of alchemy, you know that there is a very specific set of exercises within it, but you don't gain any skill or competence or realization by being into a lineage. This is what I realized after a little while. It's like, okay, get the lineage, I go through the ceremony, and they vary a little bit. Sometimes there's a red envelope, sometimes there's chanting of a poem from within the school, or normally kowtowing to the master or something like that. Actually, one of them was a lot more informal. But you go through the ceremony, and you're now a member of that tradition. And then sometimes I would do it with others. They would do it at the same time as me. And I remember them, I don't want to be unfair, but I remember them sometimes, you could see the kind of ego expression, like they had status. It's like all of a sudden had promotion at work. I'd imagine in the military, once you get your chevrons on your shoulders or whatever it is, like everything. But I just realized I went through it and I sat and I sat in the hotel rooms, the cheap, shitty hotel rooms I was in, and realized that my skill hadn't gone up. My competence hadn't gone up. I wasn't a better person. It was nothing. So very quickly that became dissatisfying to me, that phase. But there is a phase in Lotus Gong when that was very important to me. So what happened after this was the next phase of Lotus Nei Gong was like, okay, I have these credentials, I have these lineages, I know these exercises. I'm now, at this stage, been teaching for many years, a number of years, maybe a decade. I'd already been spending years and years in Asia. I'd studied Chan Buddhism, Theravada Buddhism. I've been studying some yoga, actually, more yoga than some people realize I'd gone into. But never a main thing for me, yoga. And then Tai Chi, I'd gone crazy on Yang style and Chen style, Chen village style, the Hunyuan system. I'd learned a weird Taoist version of it that's not Wudang Mountain, but another version of Tai Chi, linked to a Longmen teacher. And then I ended up doing Bagua and Jingyi out there too. I ended up doing a load of Wushu and extent. Like, it was constant. The amount I was studying, Asia was like a smorgasbord of systems for me. And because I already had a background of many years martial arts before I got there, it was great because all of a sudden I had access to all the arts I wanted. In the end, so my system got my practice got very big, and then gradually it started to shrink down as I became more efficiently focused on some aspects of it. So during that phase, like I say, it was very traditional, very Chinese. And then I dropped it all. I came to the conclusion about 10 years ago, I guess, 10, 11, 12 years ago, I don't know, that none of it mattered. And actually what mattered was that the training should be traditional. The exercises should still match how they've been passed on. But none of the culture or anything mattered to me. I'd been through the phase of trying to convince myself that I like the Guqin, or trying to convince myself that I like the taste of Chinese teas, and all of that, and the shine of Asia had worn off. Don't get me wrong, it's still beautiful. I mean, my view here, you can't see, is amazing. I'm over some mountains, a load of little villages down there, very beautiful. But the actual shine of Chinese culture, I was enamored with it when I first got there, and that had all worn off. That had all long worn off, so that it was just neutral to me. Like walking through the middle of Thailand or the middle of China, the culture and the temples and the beauty wasn't there for me any more than if I walked through the middle of London or Rome or even American cities, which aren't that old, are they? But it didn't mean anything to me. I realized that I'd become equanimous, if you like. I was neutral to all of the Asian culture. I didn't hate it, not at all, but I was just indifferent to it. And as that happened, I realized I was indifferent to the Chinese language. I was indifferent to Thai language. I wasn't interested in the food. I wasn't interested in the music. It was just plain. It was plain. It was normal. It was ordinary to me. And I remember sitting there thinking, oh shit, maybe I've done something wrong. Like, I thought that the interest in the arts had died in me. There was like a crisis of faith, if you like. It's like when a Christian suddenly questions the existence of God and the resurrection or something. I remember thinking, wow, I'm not interested in any of this. Maybe I've run out of steam. Like I've gone all through my childhood, my teens and my 20s studying these arts, and all of a sudden maybe I don't care. And it was almost like a depression set in. I remember it. And I remember very clearly because when it all happened, I was sat on this beautiful island in the south of Thailand. And I was there looking at this view thinking, I just don't care. I don't care at all. And I remember thinking, yeah, maybe I'm depressed. And it's the closest I came, there's been a couple of times. One of the closest times I came to quitting martial arts because I thought, well, if my passion's for it's gone, then I shouldn't really be doing this. But actually I realized it was the best thing ever for me. It was the best thing for me because actually what I discovered was while I had lost my interest in all of the culture, things that I had studied extensively, my actual love for the practice and cultivation and energy work and meditation had increased. It had increased. When I stripped away the cultural trimmings, actually the arts became very, very more fascinating to me, more pertinent to me and I think maybe the barrier was removed of not being Asian. And that might sound really odd, but there's a kind of, I think it happens globally, doesn't it? Historically, there's always been inferiority complexes from one culture to another. And I wouldn't want to speak for any other culture because I don't know such things, but I know that one thing that happens in the Chinese arts is that Westerners often feel inferior on some level to Asianers because the arts come from Asia. And I'm sure it happens the other way around for different things and between different cultures. So I'm definitely not moaning about it. I don't think it's a unique thing. But this whole kind of I won't get this because I'm not Asian mindset, whether people admit it or not, is kind of bubbling around beneath the surface. And you can see it because people will get a really good teacher. I've seen people have a really good Western teacher. It doesn't have to, I'm not blowing my own trumpet. It could be a different Western teacher, better than me. And they will be learning loads, and then they will meet a Chinese master. And actually, the Chinese master is not as good as the Western teacher by a long way, but they will start studying with that person instead because all they want is a Chinese teacher. And I see it in my school. People, whatever skill level I'm at, I've seen people transfer to Chinese teachers that aren't as good as me because they're Chinese. And I think that that's okay. That's what they need to do. I've been there. There was a time when I would only trust Asian teachers for sure, and I grew out of that. And I think I had it too. And once that culture disappeared, or that interest in the culture, I realized that actually there was no barrier to me reaching my goals. And I know you're not supposed to be goal orientated in the spiritual arts, but you know what I mean. There was no barrier to me anymore. And all of a sudden I found this new invigorated passion for the practices. And that kind of brings me to where a lot of people will know Lotus Nei Gong from, because at that time I was starting to write books. Yeah, maybe that equates, write books. And the first couple of books I wrote were terrible. Please don't read them. Sorry, publishing house, I apologize, but I did ask you to take them down. But I didn't know about writing books. I put these books out and they were trash. But the the later books I wrote, I'm still very happy with. Comprehensive Guide to Taoist Nei Gong, I can recommend. If you ever, like, people message me saying, what book do I buy? That one. The others, whatever, take or leave them. But that particular book is the one that I really feel that I understand it, how to write and how to explain concepts free from a lot of the cultural baggage. So that's the one I recommend. The others, whatever. I can take or leave them. Sorry again, publishing house. But so I'd written a book, and I guess that started to make me more well known. And this is what catapulted Lotus Nei Gong to a really strange phase where I think it's safe to say that I'm known as a bit of a troublemaker among certain groups. Yeah, that's true. And it's partially my nature. My excuse is I'm born in the year of the monkey, so I use that. And I think it's also just who I am. My family have a Romany root in them, and the trickster gene is there, I guess. So I've always been a little bit of a troublemaker. And I think on one of those faces people want to slap too, so there's that as well. But actually, I think a part of the reason that I ended up so inflammatory for some is that Lotus Nei Gong on me started to get known a little bit more in the public arena within the wider scene, rather than being insular like I always had been, at the stage where I started to be less interested in the Chinese trimmings and the cultural stuff. So I started to speak out and rail against the necessity of all of that cultural baggage and lineage and tradition. And this offended a lot of people. But if they had actually seen who I was and when I had been teaching prior to this phase, they would have found that actually I was more in line with their values. So I was a lot more into Chinese culture and lineage and tradition. It had to be a lot more sort of classically connected to those lines. I was even cosplaying at one stage. There's a phase where, you'll find me in Taoist uniforms and things like this. But so do you see what I mean? Like, as I transition from this very sort of what most people would expect internal arts teachers to be, over to this new kind of phase of who I was, where I really didn't care about any of that, that's when I started to get known, and that's why people found me quite disrespectful, rather than realizing actually it was the phase that I was moving into. Who knows, maybe I'll go full circle and become interested in Chinese culture again, but I doubt it. So this is really sort of the third phase of Lotus Nei Gong. So you have the first phase, which was not really knowing what I'm doing, just teaching people hit each other, fucking it all up because I was too young, didn't really know how to deal with people. My bedside manner was terrible, so I would always clash with people in the class. Then you have this middle phase that was a very traditional martial arts, lineage, uniforms, a lot of Chinese language used when I'm teaching, things like this, lots of referencing to classical texts and scripture, lots of homage to the sort of older ways of doing things. And then this new phase where I just don't care. Where to me the practice is about what do the tools do for you as a person, and it's not about preserving a tradition anymore, because I think there's plenty of people doing that. There's already people preserving the traditions. So my school is not about that. It's not about preserving the tradition. The exercises were never changed. It's not like I changed what I was doing, but the ethos is different. It's more like the school is more for people that are less interested in all of the cultural trimmings, baggage, package, if you see those words as negative. I'm more interested in how can I use these tools to cultivate myself and get the most out of it. That's it. That's the ethos to the school. And one of the things that I had to do was explain to people, certainly within the sort of 10 years ago, 8 years ago, something like that. Sorry, just my position. It's a very soft cushion. You sort of sink into it. I end up with a curve in my back. So as I transitioned to that, I had to sort of let people know within the school, this is who I am now. I'm not that interested in the culture. And you can see in Lotus Nei Gong between 10 years ago and 8 years ago, and sort of coming up to the COVID era, sort of 10 years ago, 8 years ago to the COVID era when the world shut down in 2020, the greatest amount of conflict between me and my own students. Like all schools have politics, but there was a phase where I just fell out with everybody, and everything I did seemed to annoy the hell out of students. And I remember thinking, if I'm clashing with all these students, seniors as well, and people were leaving and getting annoyed, it was like a a mass exodus from the school, and many of them thought I was, they would project onto me that I was evil and stuff like that. And I remember actually what happened was what I was losing was many of the people that were very fascinated in the Chinese culture and the tradition and the lineage. And you can kind of see, because they would cling to the Chinese uniforms when I very clearly within the school said I don't care about such things, and the Chinese uniforms disappeared and all of that disappeared, and I stopped talking about lineage, and Baisha became less important. I didn't care about any of that. And that was when it all started to cause ruptions, and I realized it was a kind of natural exodus of these people from that traditional classical phase to the new phase, and it was healthier that they left. But it's interesting to see that if you it's not even reinventing yourself, because I didn't mean to reinvent myself. I just naturally hit a phase where I changed as a person, and what I liked changed. And that was obviously reflected in what I was doing. And I remember seeing that change of person A to person B can create a massive turmoil. And it was really interesting seeing that disruptive time in the school. Very difficult at the time being amongst it. Very difficult, not just for students, very difficult for me and people close to me. But then coming out of the other side of it, much better. Those people who were interested in classical arts have disappeared and found something else. And the people that I have around me now share a kind of interest in cultivation for the sake of cultivation. Sometimes you get people coming to the school that really want the tea ceremony and the guqin and the Taoist uniform and the recitations and the chanting and all those kind of things. They don't stick around because that's not really what I present. I'm not the teacher for them. I'm very much a pragmatist on the mechanics of let's work with this exercise and let's do what we can do and get to a certain stage. And you can make the art your own rather than have it owned by this foreign culture to you. So those people tend to leave quite quickly. Or sometimes you get people that are in that kind of school, but it's bad of me to say, also come to my school because they can get things that work. Okay, that was probably bad to say. And then they can go back to those kind of traditional schools and kind of get both flavors. But yeah, it's amazing to see like this massive turmoil. And I do remember in Lotus Nei Gong in these sort of three phases, that phase of 10 years ago to when COVID happened, which is like 6 or 7 years ago now, isn't it? 5 years ago. Yeah, okay, so that's not fair. It's probably 8 years ago to 5 years ago. So it's a 3-year period where there was complete disruption within the school and arguments and fallouts, not just with me, between other seniors and students, just complete turmoil. And I've come to realize that a lot of it was a reflection of me going through this transition from one phase to another. And in some ways, my inner turmoil myself that I was going of change into one person, because I remember feeling it inside myself, like, I don't care about the tradition, but I recognize I'm in the minority, and I don't care about the culture, but I recognize I'm in the minority. Am I wrong in doing this? And that sort of inner argument was disruptive for me too. And only when I popped out the other end was it all good. Oh, I've just changed locations because I was getting a little uncomfortable over here, and I rather self-indulgently have a hot tub. Maybe this is celebrating 20 years of Lotus Nei Gong, so I'm just in a mountain resort at the moment. So excuse me while I soak my feet. You'll find if you've ever lived in Southeast Asia, like Southeast Asians themselves I think they have special feet, like leather feet or something. They just don't notice how sort of tough the ground is. But I've spent years and years and years living in Southeast Asia now, and my feet are constantly battered by living in flip-flops. my soft British feet. So it's quite nice heating them up in a hot tub. Yeah, so I don't, like I say, I don't know if this is very interesting to a lot of people. It's kind of me sharing my thoughts, and I guess maybe you should do. I think at 20 years, maybe it's useful to people in Lotus Nei Gong, students of the school, to understand. But I think at 20 years of teaching, I wanted to sit down now and spend some time thinking about it. And I thought I'd share some of these concepts. So the kind of history of the school, but not in a way of, like the normal history. Well, I went to study with this guy for 6 months, and then I went to this guy for another year. And that kind of history is more the ethos of the school as a whole. And as I started to transition from this very classical traditional phase to the phase I'm in now, and I went through all that disruption, there was another thing that happened that was massively influential to who I am as a teacher, and that was COVID. And COVID basically, I'm sure you remember, meant that 3 years the world shut down, and that was the biggest break for me in teaching. I took 2.5 years off, I think, something like that, off of large group teaching. I still taught, actually, during that time, but I taught very small things for just a couple of people at a time. And I took a couple of years off, 2.5 years off of teaching, and maybe 3, and really just focused on myself and my own training, free from the responsibility of running these seminars or running a school. Because by this stage, Lotus Nei Gong had become national, global, like it's huge. Lotus Nei Gong is huge. The school is massive. And thankfully, I've got an amazing team around me. I didn't used to. I used to have a team that wasn't very good. And it's like anything. If you employ people, sometimes you make mistakes by employing people the wrong people. and sometimes it was problematic. But the people that I have now, the team, are so good. They're great. But I don't feel like I run Lotus Nei Gong. I feel like they do, which is great. I just make the occasional decision on such things and teach. But yeah, I'm very lucky. I'm very grateful for the team of people that helped me run this school. So anyway, the school was pretty huge, and then COVID hit, and then I had this time where I could just kind of focus on me, and COVID was the biggest skill jump in my own personal practice. And I know some people are anti-skill, like it doesn't matter, but if you run an organization, you should have a fair degree of skill. I mean, I don't think people would want to come to a martial arts school where the teacher wasn't fairly skilled, or a Qigong school where the teacher wasn't fairly skilled, I would assume. So for me, that period was a time to really focus on that, and also focus on myself. I think many of the sort of old vestiges of anger and frustration I was able to let go of, and really sort of find out what it was that sat deeper inside of me. And I feel that the evolution that went on during COVID, for me personally, was massively beneficial. But I also feel guilty saying it, because I know so many people around the world suffered on a massive scale. But I mean, I traveled a ton during COVID, and I remember getting lots of anger from people messaging me saying, oh, you're going to kill people and give them COVID. And during the COVID era, I tried to stay neutral, saying, look, I don't know anything about it. I'm not a virologist. I'm not an expert. But I'm also conspiratorial by nature, but I didn't have the knowledge of anything. So I just stayed out of it. And I kind of stayed out of COVID in general by isolating for a little bit at the beginning when I got sick, and then after that I just got on with my life, and I traveled all through Bali and Indonesia, Thailand, and then America, when most of the world was still on lockdown, including America when I traveled through it, just focusing and spent quite a lot of time with my teachers, and then focusing on my own practice, and it was great. And I really feel that after COVID, which has only been 3 years, 2.5 years, maybe 2 years, no, 2.5 years of opening up again, that I really feel I came into my own. So it's almost like another soft reboot of Lotus Nei Gong, not with regards to the ethos, but with regards to who I am. And I think COVID came at a really, again, I don't want to say it's good, because I know lots of people suffered, and I'm sorry about that. But the time off came at a period where, again, the school was very difficult, and I wasn't sure if I wanted to carry on running it. There was clashes and conflicts, and one of the teachers inside the school that I trusted very much actually broke that trust and took advantage of some students, and that hit me quite hard, because I had to get rid of this person. And so COVID, and I'm glad, and he should be gone. He was a deplorable human being, turns out, and the guilt I felt at that event happening within my school also was very, very hard for me. So, and COVID gave me a time to kind of release and get over that. And like I say, find my own way and realize that you can only do what you do. And this is where I'm up to at the moment. So yeah, the funny thing really is now that I sit at this place where Lotus Nei Gong has essentially two traditions kind of meet in me, as well as the martial arts. Okay, so Lotus Nei Gong is now Tai Chi from the Yang system, because contrary to what people think, I actually think the Yang system is the deepest, or certainly my experience for who I met, Yang style goes deepest. Chen style, I actually still practice just for me, for interest, but it's not a part of the school because I don't believe, or Chen style is great, Hunyuan system is good, but it doesn't lead, I don't think it's a course that leads to the outcome I'm personally interested in teaching. So I'm totally pro it. I hope people understand that. I'm not an anti-Chen style or anti-Hunyuan system, because I did both. I did Chen village style and Feng Zicheng's version of it. Feng was an interesting guy, actually. But, you know, I'm not anti either of those systems, and Feng was an incredibly wise gentleman, if nothing else. But they just don't lead students to where I'm interested in them going, whereas the Yang system does. So Yang style ended up being the Tai Chi that I almost exclusively do. Some of the longer term students in my school actually did do Chen style with me, so they remember bits of it. But Yang style is a platform for me to teach what I want to teach. And then the Xingyi and the Bagua Cheng style in the end, and Hebei kind of merged into one syllabus. So that I think Xingyi, the version I'd learned, had already been modified to fit Bagua anyway. So it's kind of two internal art syllabus, Bagua and Xingyi together, and then Yang style Tai Chi. And then I also still teach external boxing to beginners as well, which is mostly long fist more than anything else. But so we have this kind of martial syllabus. Then we also have the Nei Gong and the Qigong syllabus, which is really from two places. So what I have is the stuff that I teach publicly, which is really from a Longmen line, and then I teach that, and then I also have this other lineage that I only teach to hardly anybody. It's a little bit of a heavier tradition, and I teach very privately, so you'll never find any reference to it online or any videos of it or anything like that. It's a very personal, still a very close family system that is should be taught intimately, really, to a few people. So Lotus Nei Gong, like I say, you don't really know about the syllabus. It's not ever out there publicly. It's the Longmen stuff that I'm mostly doing. But it's all presented in a non-cultural fashion. That's not what interests me. So when people come along and they study in the school, like I say, it's very much about the mechanic that leads to this. And I want everybody to get as good as they can. The whole point of the teaching is to try to get people as good as you can, and then for them to express their art in their own way. Through their own understanding. So that's the ethos of my school, and that's where I rub people up the wrong way. I definitely rub up, well, I mean, I rub up several groups the wrong way, or Lotus Nei Gong does, one of which will be the ones that don't believe in anything esoteric. And I understand that, actually, obviously, you're bound to rub those people up the way. I get it, because they think we're just play acting with esoterics. I get it. Fine. I understand why those people might be upset. You're sort of practical martial art. I get it. I get why they might be upset. That's okay. But actually, it's a bit funny because I really like what they do too. I'm still a huge fan of the practical. You don't have to be into the esoteric and the weirder side of the internal arts to the exclusion of the practical. I don't know if people know that. I actually like both. So there's some teachers that don't like what I do because they see it as very esoteric. So they're very venomous, actually, in the way they speak about me. And yet, when I watch what they do, I quite like it. I have to say, when I watch what they do, if they've got skill, I quite like it. There's one teacher I can think of who hates my guts and writes the most terrible things. And then I watch him do his forms, his southern versions of Kung Fu. It's actually really good. I quite like it. You know, I've got nothing against someone because they have a different viewpoint to me in the arts. But I definitely rub those people up the wrong way. And then the other people I rub up the wrong way and upset are very much the ones that are very into the culture, the Wudang lineages, and the ones that have been and studied and go to temples and do reciting of scripture and banging the little gong. And all right, I've taken the piss out of them a little bit. Calling them cosplay Taoists was actually, there's a funny story about that. I'll tell you about this. This is my nature. Much as I like to do the arts, I also like to wind people up. I'm a little bit of a stirrer, a troublemaker. And what the reason where this all came from, because some people have asked me, why do you hate the cosplay Taoists? I don't hate the cosplay Taoists is the answer. I don't hate anybody, not at all. I actually think that they're benefiting people. I think that they are, if people want that, then that's great. What it was there was two people from the sort of new wave of Taoism, if you say, a sort of resurgence of Taoism linked to White Cloud Temple, Baiyongguan in Beijing, and Wudang Mountain, and very much linked to these, who took it upon themselves to write these highly extensive personal attacks about me, tearing everything I did to bits, which was really funny. And I watched this happening, so I was like, okay, offended these guys. And then I actually, somebody sent me some videos of what they were doing. They weren't very good. They weren't very good. Like, it doesn't matter how many scriptures they've translated or how many classical texts. They weren't very good, but they were pretty good for people who'd studied for that amount of years. They looked about where they should be for the amount of years they've been training. They looked like just beyond beginners. So I thought about responding, and then I thought, well, no, I don't really want to upset anybody. I would never carry out a vicious attack on anyone's personality or a vicious attack on what they're doing, because everyone's just living their life. And I don't think they're bad people. So I simply said, I don't like cosplay Taoists. That was it. Now, to me, that's a minor thing, but wow, it upset them. It was, the backlash from that was absolutely huge. And it amused me. It amused me, the disparity between a school of traditional Taoists who are very, you'll see them play acting, and they'll carry the horsetail wisp around, which is basically a stick with for hitting flies, and they'll carry it around, and they'll play the piece, and you'll see them sort of walking through these serene Chinese sort of backgrounds, which that because I've been there, I know they chose the angle very carefully, so you can't see the truckload of tourists out here, so it looks very serene. But they're walking through these areas, playing very spiritual, and yet they will make venomous, detailed attacks on you, writing blog articles and things like this to attack you. And then I simply say, oh yeah, cosplayers, and they lose their shit. Like, they absolutely lose their shit. It's the equivalent of them attacking you extensively. Okay, whatever. And then you flick them, and then they scream blue murder. So when I discovered this created such a reaction, I carried on using the term, because it amused me that I don't have to say anything venomous, I don't have to make any personal attacks, but it winds them the hell up. But the truth is, I've got nothing against them at all. And actually quite the opposite. I think if somebody is interested in the cultural side of Taoism, wants to go study scripture and chanting and recitations, there's plenty of good schools out there for them. There's the Parting Clouds School of Taoism, who I actually spoke to recently personally, but I've seen them, what they're doing for a long time. They're not the people I was attacking as cosplay Taoists, by the way. There's never been any conflict between us. But I like what they do. I think it's good. They are more... they would probably correct me, but it looks to me like it's more sort of what I call temple Taoism, where there's a lot of reciting of scripture in the morning and the evening, and teaching people how to be priests. And I would say, for me, it holds zero interest. I've been there when I was early days of China. I actually did quite a lot of that training in some of the temples there in China. But it's not my interest at all. It's really not. I'm really a pragmatist on the arts, and that is not a part of my study or a part of my journey these days. But at the same time, if that's what people want, then I think that's a good place to go. So here's a recommendation. If you are interested in the kind of Taoism I'm not, I think the Parting Cloud Taoism, you can look them up online, are a good place to go. So I'm not actually anti any of that stuff. It's just not what I do. But it's quite... funny seeing that as I hit that phase of I'm really not interested in the cultural aspects of the art, that's when the biggest degree of conflict arose between myself and other schools. And yeah, fine, I don't mind. I'm not afraid of drama, but I also try not to get involved in it because I don't really care. I have to say, in all these years, I've been through the early stages of the school, had a bit of conflict between me and a couple of schools, and then I went through that period where I was, when I was transitioning from a traditional, very classical practitioner to a more open practitioner, I would say. And the level of conflict that was there at that time between me and several seniors who did not want the school to change in that direction was so great that these days, online stuff, it doesn't bother me at all. Like, it's okay, it's fine. People can say what they want. So this phase here that I've entered into now is kind of, I think it will stick. This is kind of what I'm interested in. I mean, I came to discover I mean, I got very interested in, and again, I don't, if I'm saying this, I'm not negative about other people's journeys, because I think everybody has to go through their own journey, and I think some people will actually come to the same conclusion as me. I think some of the classical martial artists will move out into something a bit more contemporary. Ismet did this, doesn't he? Me and Ismet have never really had anything to do with each other. We're very different lines, but obviously Ismet Himit from Wudang, again, maybe he'll disagree, but I remember him being very traditional Wudang, top knot, blah, 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 living like that. And then I saw this phase where he kind of transitioned away from that into sort of combining what he was doing with, I would say, MMA and other arts and things, and moving away from that very traditional way of being. And I think all the better for it. More power to the man. He trains very hard. So I think there are other people that, maybe he would disagree, but I see that as what he's done. And I think there are other people doing that, transitioning that way. And I'm pro it. I think too much not looking backwards at all within your practice is a bad idea. Looking backwards too much within your practice is a bad idea. And actually, there's a kind of middle ground for me that is the ideal, where the exercises are tried and tested by generations, but we also have to recognize that we're not living in the Tang Dynasty, and there is room for people that simply want to do the practice for practice and cultivation's sake. And when I made that transition, and I lost a lot of seniors who really didn't want to make that transition, I also lost a lot of students who didn't want to make that transition. But what happened at the time, I was like, wow, I'm self-destructing the school. Oh, well, at least I'll be able to retire, which has always been some weird fantasy in the back of my head. I can get out of teaching. And I thought as I transitioned across, okay, I'll eradicate the school and make my life easy. Actually, something else happened. Now tons of other people piled into the school who weren't looking for the classical side of it. They didn't want the language. They didn't want the scripture. They didn't want the guqin. They didn't want the uniforms, but they wanted something that works. And that's kind of where I am now. And I have to say that the feeling, there's many long-term students that I love dearly within the school, and I have a very close relationship with. They're awesome. And some of them have been with me 20 years, right from the beginning, like Neil Lodge, been with me since almost day one. Like, thank you very much for all the trust, Neil. But there's also a lot of other people that have come in new, and the new students, it's good because the vibe very much matches mine, obviously, because they come to learn off me, and they're not interested in the sort of classical side of it either. And I actually see that they progress faster. I hate to say it. I see that they progress a lot quicker in what they're doing. So I've gone on for quite some time now about the history of Lotus Nei Gong, or the phases of Lotus Nei Gong, which people probably weren't even interested in anyway. Maybe this is one of these podcasts that gets like 10 views or something like that, or that's fine. This is what I wanted to talk about. So this is the phases of Lotus Nei Gong, of 20 years of Lotus Nei Gong. I'm now here in Bali teaching a pretty much a full-time group, as I'm sure regular listeners will know. And it's fun actually, because I'm really presenting the culmination of, in this place here, it's a mixed syllabus of martial arts, medicine, Nei Gong. They've just started Tway Nai here as well. And we'll see how that develops. But it's kind of the culmination then of not only, 40 years of martial arts training, if you count childhood training, unbroken. I just carried on through, and 20 years of teaching, and it's quite a syllabus. And I think sometimes people are unhappy with me. I got an abrasive personality. I don't mind admitting that, but people are happy with the training. The ones who are there, really getting into it, they get to a stage where they're past the foundations, a couple of years in, doing incredibly well. The other day I watched them train. They were good. The skill level is getting good in this school now. That's the advantage of full-time training. It's bloody exhausting, I have to say. Training is tiring. Teaching is tiring. Teaching a full-time school, that's tiring, especially when you're squeezing it in amongst visits to see your own teachers, which is, quite a lot of pressure on me. These days there's a lot of expectations to be at a certain skill level myself and things like this. So, I'm here doing this and they're getting really good. And I have to say that for the 20th year of Lotus Nei Gong, I think that I'm proud of it. Pride is a sin, but I'm proud of it. I'm proud of what it's become. There's definitely been turmoil inside the school, and I haven't always been the best at teaching, and certainly not the best at managing people. But I've been through a journey myself while I'm doing this, and I feel I'm a lot better for it now, and I feel I'm a lot better at it, especially the last couple of years. I feel I've finally come into my own. That's bad, isn't it? It takes 20 years of teaching to really finally become comfortable with teaching. That's what happens. It's a slow process to learn anything, isn't it? And teaching is a skill just like anything else. So yeah, 40 years of martial arts this year. You would have to be bored by now. And 20 years of teaching, countless hours training, ridiculous amount of teachers met. I mean, my CV on the website, I keep it very brief, and I just name the sort of most influential teachers. But one day, as a kind of egotistical passion project, I guess, I will write a full, detailed, not an autobiography, but a detailed CV and experience of my training, because I've had some odd experiences over the years. Uh, and I would like to record them at some stage, record them for posterity, but it'll have to be when a couple of teachers die of old age, because I'm not sure they would be. I'm a truth teller. I can't just tell the good things. I'd have to tell the bad things, and I wouldn't want to. I wouldn't want to cause any ripples. So I'll have to. Can't do it yet, but one day I will record it all, because it's been a really fun journey. How long will Lotus Nei Gong go on? I don't know. No idea. I mean, I'm doing this project in Bali. It's probably going to take me up to almost 25 years of Lotus Nei Gong, isn't it? Maybe it's time to stop after that. I don't know. Maybe that's it. Maybe that's time to stop and do something else. Maybe I'll finally listen to all those people when I was traveling in Asia in the early years, and I'll go get a proper job. I'll run Lotus Nei Gong to 25 years, and then I'll go become a bank clerk, or I'll work in a bar or something. Who knows? Maybe that's the next phase of my life. And I'm nearly 50 there. So yeah, maybe that's enough teaching, or who knows? Maybe it will have morphed into something else. I'm interested to see. I don't have any big plans. My only plans at the moment are to finish this project with these people here, and then see where it goes. See where it goes. These people here in Bali are training so hard that I owe it to them to teach to the best of my ability. That's how it always works for me, you know. Like, people think that the fees you pay is what makes you deserving of the teachings, but it's not. The fees keep a school open and keep the lights on and all that kind of stuff. The amount of effort you put in, combined with your character, ultimately, is what means you earn the effort of the teacher. And these guys here are training so hard that I have to put a lot of effort in to teach them. So yeah, I'm very pleased with these guys in Bali. I'm also pleased with all the people who've been in the school for 25 years. And I think maybe I should conclude this. If anyone got to the end of my rambling, self-indulgent talk about my own journey of teaching, I want to thank everybody in the school. Thank all of the thousands, hundreds, I don't know, lots of people, just lots of people. I want to thank all the wonderful people that are inside the school, either right from the beginning 20 years ago, like a couple of you are, or have joined somewhere along that journey, and apologize for any shortcomings I've made as a teacher along that way, because I'm not perfect. Nobody is. I'm far from it. Much gratitude to all the people who've come and shared this journey, and of course, endless, boundless love and gratitude to the people that taught me. Teachers that have passed away now, teachers that I don't train with anymore, and current teachers. Thank you ever so much for everything you've done. And all I can ever hope is that I've managed to be at least a beneficial influence upon the internal art scene, if sometimes a slightly inflammatory one. Thank you very much.